Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our season finale of Ripped from the Headlines, as we'll go on a summer schedule after this class. Like it used to be in the good old days of television, you can watch all the reruns, go to the YouTube channel, catch up on uh, episodes you may have missed, or some of the outtakes, or the never before seen scenes from some of the classes. Of course, Torah continues throughout, and everyone's welcome to the other learning opportunities we have out here in the summer. And please God, we'll resume in September. I think I already found my first headline, so it's very excited. It's going to be a secret. With warmer weather outside, got me thinking about summertime halacha, or halachas are things that may take place outside or with summer activities or summer questions. So we're going to look at three topics briefly. Two of them were from headlines from the VIN news outlet. VIN stands for Was is Nayas, which is Yiddish for what's new. And also discussed by Diane Yitzhak Grossman, who is from the Beis Havad Halacha Center, someone I've mentioned before. And so you see source number one, collision at home plate, life-changing lesson from a top Rosh Yeshiva, where the article mentions recently two sincere Erlicha Jews, right? That's how you know this is the Vasas Nayas news outlet and not the New York Times. I haven't seen the New York Times use the word Erlicha. Some might say they don't know what Erlicha means. Had a friendly dispute to resolve while playing baseball. See, baseball, that's a warm weather sport. One of the men was dashing across home plate and collided with the other man, the catcher. One of the men, a doctor, broke his leg, was not able to work for 2 weeks. He estimated his loss at $15,000 and wanted to know if he was permitted to sue the other man, whose liability happened to be covered by an insurance company. They brought their shaila to Rabbi Bitzalel Y. Radinsky of Forshay, the popular and around Rosh Yeshiva, Yeshivas Or Ruvain in Wesley Hills, Rav of Kahal Avas Yitzhak, right? This is in the Monsey area. Among other factors, the Rav invoked a psak issued by Rabbeinu Tam, who ruled that if two people are jousting for sport, which was not uncommon in his days, there is no chiyuv mazik. There's no obligation for damage, because savar v'kibel, the participants accepted the potential injury as a risk. And essentially, they are mochel the damage, meaning they decline and they recognize and they forgive any damage. Rabbi Radinsky advised the donor to be mivater, the doctor to be mivater. He said, "Give up. You should give up on your claim." And added that Hashem has many ways to compensate his loss. So, leaving aside, this idea of being mivater and other ways for Hashem to compensate the loss, we see, what happens when kids are roughhousing, what happens when adults are roughhousing, what happens, the game gets very intense and something happens and someone injures another person. How does Jewish law look at that? And there are other issues that can get discussed in terms of, we see here there's a preference for finding a pshara, a resolution, rather than having a direct din following the letter of the law, often in Beit Din cases. And we've encountered that often really as an extension of the meta principle in Jewish law of the asita hayashar v'hatov, do what is right and good. It's not a mitzvah, do what's good. What's good, that it all depends on the perspective, but the idea is to try to find a way forward that everyone would agree upon. But in particular, this idea of there being kind of a roughhousing clause built into Jewish practice is interesting. Where do we see this idea that sometimes there can be roughhousing and sometimes damages can take place and sometimes there can be financial loss that isn't going to be covered by halacha, right? We know in general that if someone damages someone else, you're responsible for the damages. There could be a difference whether it was willful or whether it was accidental, but still there's some element of responsibility that's built into the whole damages system. Right? That's the whole Bava Kama conversation in terms of the Gemara. It's Parshas Mishpatim, right? Ayin tachas ayin, eye for an eye. We know that there's culpability, there's liability. different gradations and the like. So why here is this something that is recognized as kind of understood? Savar the kibel. Why is it there's some sort of expectation that in life, if you're playing around, it's something that you have to live with the loss. And I think it's certainly relevant. Kids playing around, adults playing around. Where does this come from? That there should be. It shouldn't just be a straight open and shut case. You cause the damage, you pay the damage. So let's look at some of the sources. And of course, as always, any questions, feel free to chime in or put them into the chat. So the Gemara in Sukkah has a conversation about after the Sukkot holiday, right, or in the 7th day of the Sukkot holiday. Source number 2, immediately after fulfilling the mitzvah, taking the 4 species on the 7th day of the festival, children remove their lulavim from the binding and eat their esrogim as an expression of extreme joy. Right, you're done with the lulav and esrog. We have kind of a remnant of this that went on the Hoshana Rabbah after we finish the circuits 7 times around holding lulav and esrog. We start reciting the Hoshana salvation prayers, and we put down the lulav and pick up the Hoshana, right, part of the stage directions of that morning service. And the Gemara tells us that back in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, they would take the lulavim out of their binding and they would eat their esrogim, and that's how the day would end. Now, also one other interesting practice that emerges from this, for the more active and discerning worshiper in Hoshana Rabbah, you may have noticed some people remove the ring of the lulav. Right, very often there's a custom to have lulav have rings to keep it together, doesn't shake too much. It says they remove their lulavim from the binding. This is the source of a practice that exists certainly in Hasidic communities of removing that top ring and having a shakier lulav. In any event, that's what they would do. So Rashi puts an interesting spin on this. Rashi says that the language miyad tinoko shom tines lulavehem. Immediately at the end of the service, the young people would shom tines lulavehem. They would set them aside. They would release them, whether it means unbind them or drop them. But what does Rashi say is taking place here? Hagadolim shom tines lulave haktanim miyadam. The adults would grab them out of the hands of the young people. V'ochlin esrogehen, they would eat their esrogim. Shel tinokos. The adults took the lulavim and ate the esrogim of the young people. There's nothing here about, it's not a violation of stealing, it's not a violation of darkei shalom, it's not a violation of manners, right? There's nothing inappropriate here or illegal here, because that's what they did, machmas simcha. That was the joy. The joy was you take people's lulavim and you take their esrogim and you take things away from other people. So it's almost that this rowdy or even technically illegal behavior was excused under the shadow of, under the protection of, this is how they were singing and dancing. Tosfos here in Sukkah, source number 4, we may learn from here that those young men who ride horses to entertain the groom and they battle each other and one tears another garment or damages his horse, they are exempt from liability, because they are accustomed to do so in celebration of the joy of the groom. Tosos extends Rashi's understanding of this Gemara to a situation of, quite literally horsing around. And if you're horsing around, so while you're making joy for the bride and groom, you are exempt from liability, because this is what happens. Now, 2 things. One, not everyone understands the Gemara the way Rashi understands the Gemara. If you look at the language of the Gemara, no one talked about taking from. They talk about the holder of the lulav and esrog dropping it and or eating it. But this is Rashi's take, and Tosfos takes it one step further. Second point, I don't know about you, but when you hear about the riding of the horses to entertain the groom and battling each other, what comes to mind? What type of behavior?
Wild.
So definitely, wild,
Jousting.
Jousting, yes. I'm also thinking of, ever know how, like, you ever see, well, I'm sure you have seen, it's pretty common. They sometimes have, like, the guys pretend to be like bulls and they have the You know, they take the napkin and they're running through like this. It seems as if this has kind of a medieval Jewish origin, right? You know, it's hard to imagine. You know, look, maybe they actually did have jousting and real horses, but something tells me it wasn't. You know, it wasn't every single Jewish wedding that had people riding horses around them, even in even in the times of the Bali Tosfos. But it's certainly this idea of pretending to be horses and jousting and stuff like that. That type of behavior that we see, you know, at our weddings today does have, medieval precedent. You know, next time you're at a wedding and they start playing the song and everyone starts jumping up and down, this is where it's coming from. But we see that there's a certain type of excuse. There's an excuse for the damage. It's don't pay the damages. You're doing it for a mitzvah, and even though it seems a little bbit wild, or even if it's technically illegal, you're not going to be held accountable for it because it's part of the mitzvah. Taking it, into the behavior that we mentioned earlier on, this idea of roughhousing, Sefer HaAguda, one of the collections of later medieval Jewish practice, based on this Gemara Sukkah. So I have source number 5. So have I occasionally ruled regarding young men who play in the shul courtyard on Shabbos and strike each other, provided they do not do so intentionally. Right? The roughhousing, and someone gets hurt, right? Okay, that's what happens. You're not gonna make a whole lawsuit over it. This is what happens. Now it's become this is what's normally happen, as long as it's not intentional. One other further example in terms of this one, in terms of stealing, Trumat Hadeshen, all food that the young men snatch from each other, even without permission, due to the joy of Purim. This does not entail theft or robbery, and they should not be summoned to Beit Din, and we are not concerned about this as long as they do not behave improperly according to the municipal leadership. Municipal leadership, obviously the Jewish communal norms, and the Trumas Hadeshen invokes the concept of Jewish communal officials. We talked about this other times, the Zion Tuvei Ha'ir, right? There was a town council. So look, Purim's a bit of a joyous, maybe rowdy time, and people are, copping things, they're taking things, and it became a practice. And what about the fact that someone takes something from someone else, which might officially be stealing? All right, the tolerance level for rowdy behavior has been elevated on Purim, and we let them get away with it. And yes, we would normally consider this stealing, but it's not so on. It's not so on a day like Purim. So remember, Trumat Hadeshen is writing in the for Ashkenazic Jewry, France, Germany, the Beit Yosef in the laws of Purim. He quotes this practice, and he quotes this excuse that's often invoked, and we don't make people pay for the damages, we don't make people return the object or pay for the food they steal. So the Beit Yosef says, "V'nira li dahainu lidhidu." Seems to me that this excuse for the rowdy behavior or the exempting from paying back what they steal is lididhu, according to those people. That was the way they practiced. Those people, the Ashkenazim. Aval anu shelo na'agu kein, we, the Sephardim, who don't have this practice, it doesn't matter at all. You can't, you damage, you take, you break it, you buy it. You take it, you pay for it. That's not how it works in our more civilized Sephardic culture. Now, it's just interesting that the Beit Yosef is the Rabbi Yosef Karo's commentary on the Torah, right? Just a brief reminder. When we talk about the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, that's Rabbi Yosef Karo's Code of Jewish Law. The comments are those of the Ramah. Before you had a Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote a commentary on the Torah, which was written out in a similar organizational style as the Shulchan Aruch. This was his commentary. So this comment of the Beit Yosef in his commentary in the Torah is not quoted in the Shulchan Aruch. So this kind of distinction between Ashkenazim and Sephardim is not something that Rabbi Cairo writes as a matter of absolute law. He's kind of commenting on the cultural differences between Ashkenazim and Sephardim in his commentary. Code of Jewish Law doesn't talk about this issue at all. The Shulchan Aruch does have the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, the Ashkenazi comment made about this subject, where he quotes the Trumat Hadeshen and talks about the rowdy Ashkenazi behavior on Purim. The Shulchan Aruch, however, is silent about this issue. One other, piece in terms of the exemption that's there when the behavior is kind of accepted or normative, even if it's the behavior is accepted as normative, even though the type of behavior would never normally be acceptable. The Bach, Rabbi Yoel Sirkis, talks about the exemption. Source number 8 from payment for excused damage is only when the damage, whether financially or physically, is minor. For example, damage to a limb, right? You give the guy a bruise, or maybe a broken bone. How this is true only when there's such standard practice and this kind of acknowledgement that that accidents happen or people get hurt. However, one is obligated to pay if he blinded someone or the injured party lost a limb. Right? We're not going to take this to more severe injury. We're not, like we saw in the case in the article that started our conversation, right? Rabbi Radinsky said, "Be mavater, let it slide." He wouldn't let it slide if this was something much more serious and permanent and lasting. This is just kind of, let boys be boys or something like that. So that's, one issue. And if everyone's playing around more, we may encounter this type of issue more and more. So first example of some warmer weather halachic issues, questions, comments, or reactions.
Hi, Rabbi. I guess the last thing about the seriousness of it kind of answers my question. But how does this reconcile with with the Are Miklat and you're swinging an axe and the head of the axe falls off? Is it apples and oranges or
I think it's apples and oranges. Look, someone losing a life is a lot different than an injury, even if it's a permanent injury.
Of course,
right. And the ear miklat is very, very specific, and I think you touched upon it, right? What Hirsch is referring to, we'll be reading about it soon in the parsha that if someone kills someone accidentally, they run to the city of refuge. And why they run to the city of refuge? Because the kinsperson of the one killed may want to exact revenge and kill the person who killed accidentally. So this is the idea, the city of refuge, the Ir Miklat. In that discussion, there's a lot of detail that is presented as being transmitted through the oral Torah as to what exactly happened. So, like, for example, we talk about, God forbid someone, kills someone accidentally in a car accident, and it's no one's fault. It's, terrible tragic accidents happen. That's not what the Ir Miklat is about. It talks about the axe and which way it's going and if it falls off versus if it's, which way it's swung. So I think that, the Ir Miklat on two levels. One, it's right. It's certainly an irrevocable tragic incident that takes place, that someone loses a life, and even that this situation has has another piece of the conversation. It has to do with the city of the Levim, and it has to do with almost a kind of a metaphysical. This is a tit for tat type of a situation they talk about. So okay. So I think that what we're talking about is in the course of trying to to imitate some sort of behavior that they saw in a football game. Someone gets hurt, and on some level, Jewish law does have eye for an eye, that has damages. Sheves or ripui boshes, the Torah refers to, and the Talmud expands upon the levels of compensation that are owed in certain cases. But here, there seems to be a kind of, boys will be boys ethos that also extends into the halachic decision-making process.
Thank you.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Speaking about divisions among Jews, yesterday, a very important decision by the Israeli Supreme Court requiring the Orthodox young men to serve in the army. I'm wondering...
That was actually today.
Okay.
So yes, it's hot off the press. Not everyone may have read about it yet.
So how is that going to be received?
That's a good question. So, yeah, you should refer back to the article that everybody should serve that I wrote. How will it be received? Something tells me there will be protests. Someone's always protesting in Israel. I don't know if anyone's ever been to the King's Hotel. It's called the Prima King's Hotel now in Jerusalem. It's right next to a square that's actually pretty famous. It's called Kikar Tzarfat, right, Paris Square. And if you want to know what's going on in Israel, just take a look out over there. There's, all sides are protesting there, and you can get a good look at it. There too, there comes up the, situations, and, you talk about protests, people getting injured in protests, how that plays out, right? Whose fault? And then sometimes there's an investigation where the police are overly aggressive. Was it the fact of the protesters themselves? This plays into, it's in some ways interconnected. However, I'm talking about summer fun instead of protests. So we're using the examples from roughhousing while playing baseball.
Will there be primarily compliance, do you expect?
I would hope so. We should always try to follow the letter of the law. But then again, it's not, it's in my side of the community, it's not really the one that's going to be disappointed by this. As with everything else with regards to Israel, it's complicated. Stay tuned. Right? If we solved everything, we'd have nothing to talk about anymore. So, let's move to another summer example. In this summer example, it's could really be a year-round example, but it has the word swimming pool in it. So I figured we could connect it to a summertime halacha class. Also from Vasas Nayas, is a couple of years ago, the owners of a building in Williamsburg may be facing a hefty fine over a massive swimming pool discovered on its roof. A full-size swimming pool was installed on the roof of a commercial building. The gleaming 480 square foot above-ground pool, which apparently was used regularly this past summer, was drained this week, according to the Department of Buildings. New York, we know, it's hot. We get it, the DOB tweeted. But please don't try to build a rooftop swimming pool without first getting permits and hiring professionals to do the job properly. So that was the situation. And there are a couple of halakhic issues surrounding this that I think are worthy of attention. One is the fact that you have to be sure not to cause any danger. Right? When you hear about rooftops and you hear about Jewish law, what comes to mind is the mitzvah of a ma'akeh. Ma'akeh is the fence that you need to put around rooftops. Obviously, people are probably also thinking about swimming pools having to be fenced in so kids don't wander off into them, or younger children. The other piece is doing something that goes against regulations. And so I think in general, the name of the game, as Torah observant Jews, is you follow the laws, you follow the mitzvahs, you follow the rules, you follow the regulations. So you got to be safe on the one hand, and it's a question of whether this was safe or not. B, you got to follow the laws, which is also something that's important, right? We know Dina da Malchusa Dina, the law of the land, is also incumbent from a religious perspective to be followed. So how do we look at this? So let's first look from a danger perspective, right? Because how far do you have to go in terms of to keep things safe? Just in general, you could ask the question about a rooftop. You could ask a question about a swimming pool. Right? How far do you go when it comes to keeping things safe? Right? When the Torah describes a rooftop in a certain ma'akeh, well, there are other things that could be dangerous, in a home, like a swimming pool. Does it require a fence from a halachic perspective or not? So, when it comes to certain practical applications, obviously some common sense needs to be employed, but as can be expected, Jewish law does err on the side of caution. Right? We know pikuach nefesh, we save a life, so we want to take things. We would rather take things to the extreme in terms of safety. But what's the obligation? What's the responsibility? So the Rambam, source number 10. This is from the laws discussing Rotseach u'shmirat hanefesh, the murderer, and protecting life. Anyone who leaves his roof open without a guardrail negates the observance of a positive mitzvah and violates a negative mitzvah. As it says, do not cause the blood to be spilled in your home. This requirement applies to a roof and similarly to any place that might present a danger and cause a person to stumble and die. For example, if a person has a well or a cistern in his courtyard, he must erect a sand wall 10 handbreadths high around them, or make a cover for them so the person will not fall in and die. Similarly, there's a positive mitzvah to remove any obstacle that would pose a danger to life and to be very careful regarding these matters. As it says, beware for yourself and guard your soul. If a person leaves dangerous obstacles and does not remove it, he negates the observance of a positive mitzvah and violates a negative mitzvah. Do not cause blood to be spilled. Just interesting that the Rambam talks about a cistern or a well, right? We're talking about a swimming pool, right? In general, you have to be careful. Yeah, the later this is quoted in Shulchan Aruch in the Code of Jewish Law. Obviously, you can never eliminate every tiny aspect of danger, right? Otherwise, you have to sit inside and never move and never do anything or go anywhere. But in general, we err to the side of caution. So if you're going to build a swimming pool, you have to make sure that all as many safety standards, safety concerns as possible will be followed. That could mean in terms of the construction, in terms of the maintenance, or recognizing that if there are regulations against building such a structure or that you have to get certain permits to do so, those can be for safety reasons. Right? Source number 11.
Wait,
this is
Rabbi Weinstock?
let's see this applied as a halachic principle. More practically in the 19th century, source number 11, Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkis. According to Torah law as well, one is obligated to take every possible measure to provide safety from fires as coming upon one who causes damage to distance oneself. Although fire doors provide only a marginal increase in safety, since the doors are open most of the time, one is nevertheless obligated to do whatever is possible to do, and therefore the reporter does not have the status of a moser regarding the iron doors. The situation Shmelkis was dealing with was there was an ordinance that you had to have fire doors, and someone didn't put those in, and a fellow Jew told the authorities that the laws were not being followed. And then, so the Jew was accused of being moser, of turning on his fellow Jew. He turned the guy into the authorities. Why didn't he cover for him? And Rabbi Shmelkis says, no, if there's something that's been deemed as a safety measure, even if you don't really appreciate it, even if at the end of the day, it's not even proven to provide that much more safety, but the authorities have chosen for it to be safety, you have to follow along. And you can't say, well, it's not really providing that much safety, so I'll do otherwise. And if someone disobeys and ignores the ordinances, and you turn that person in, that's not considered turning a Jew into the authorities for an improper reason. There's a valid reason. You're not keeping people safe. Yes, question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, on another subject, some people think Shmirat Nefesh is being able to, when you're very boiling, go into that pool on Shabbos, but you could wait till the end for that.
Well, that's probably not the worst violation in the world either.
Right.
Swimming on Shabbos there are halachic problems with swimming on Shabbos, and there's sometimes permission. There's certainly a way to swim in a permissible fashion on Shabbos. That's definitely more of an Ashkenazic approach than a Sephardic approach than an Ashkenazi approach.
And
but
an Atlantic Beach approach. An Atlantic Beach approach.
I think there's some probably people in many localities, maybe they're called, Five Towns or Manhattan or even Queens, that Jews may go into their pools on Shabbos. I think that technically, from a letter of the law perspective, it's probably, according to many authorities, perfectly permissible. Now, from a letter of the law. Now, from the spirit of the law, there's a lot more to be discussed. I think how should one spend one Shabbos? So I think one should spend one Shabbos going to shul Friday night and Shabbos morning, and the afternoon share, and mincha, and shal shudis. Now, there are many, many good Jews, right? Some of whom may be listening to this class who don't do that all the time. Some of them do. I don't want to embarrass anyone by saying which ones are all these things and which ones aren't. But when it comes to what Jews should do on Shabbos, there's probably, going to the afternoon shiur is probably higher than swimming. Now, going into a pool is probably better than getting into a car going shopping. But then, we're talking about people's, proclivities and where they are in terms of their, their Shabbos choices. But I think that's definitely a broader topic that has both legal and more philosophical ramifications. When it comes, so Yitzchak Shmelkis takes the Rambam's idea of being safe, and you have to be safe, even if you don't see yourself as being safe because of this. You have to do more. You have to follow the regulation. If people say this is a safety measure, it's a safety measure. This went even further in terms of source number 12. This is Rabbi in Lower East Side, turn of the 20th century. The question had to do with putting sukkahs on fire escapes. Right, Lower East Side, not many places to have your own sukkah, and people would put them on fire escapes. Seems to appears to me that it is a mitzvah to publicize that it's forbidden according to Torah law and secular law to construct a sukkah on a fire escape. It's dangerous. The fire escapes need to be kept clear. Do they have to be kept clear all of the time? Right? This is, you can see it's only for emergency purposes, or, this is always, this becomes an issue with all sorts of different types of regulations that are part of building codes and variances and the like. Right? You have a code, but if they're going to give you a variance, so who cares? Maybe you don't have to follow the code if they're going to give you a variance at some point. What will lead to that variance? Who knows? Is it capriciously chosen? Is there any logic in it? Right? Some of these things lead to further questions. But Rabbi, the author of the Ohel Yosef, felt that, look, fire escapes are there to escape from a fire, and if you're going to block that because you think it's not such a big deal, well, you may need to think again, because whether or not you agree that the fire escapes really need to be kept open, well, that's who gets to decide. Right? Is it based on the fact that how many times a fire escape has been used lately? Right? These are not who gets to decide in these type of situations. So Rabbi Free, the author of the Ohel Yosef, felt no, fire escapes are for escaping fires. You build a sukkah there, it's not allowed. So we start getting into a little bit of a gray area in terms of what happens if you did anyway. In the case of a sukkah, right? If you build a sukkah in a way that you shouldn't, is this considered a sukkah that you don't fulfill your obligation in? Right? Let's say you build a sukkah on someone else's property, right? Do you fulfill the obligation or not? And so, what happens in a situation where your inability to build a sukkah is not based on any property or ownership rule, but it's based upon a city ordinance, or dina de malchusa dina? So this question was addressed, and as can be expected, there's a machlokas. Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein, who was the son-in-law of Rabbi Elyashiv, was asked the question, source 13, Mahi halacha k'shashiltonos b'chutz la'aretz osrim l'schach b'marpesot shel habatim. What happens when the authorities in the diaspora, right? In Israel, they build buildings so that people can have sukkahs. But what happens in the diaspora where they said you're not allowed to put schach on the porch? Because they say they're ugly. Now, imagine some of you were thinking about the city inspector who gives the guy a ticket for building a sukkah and says you have to take it down in 7 days. So of course, there's that flexibility, and then everything works out well. So they say you can't build it because of aesthetic reasons. Can you build a sukkah there? You can't build a sukkah against the law. Now, just pointing out, the ordinance that you're violating is a city ordinance because they not from a safety perspective, but from an aesthetic perspective, and that was the question. So he says he asked his father, Rav Elyashiv, and Rav Elyashiv, since you have to have permission from the authorities to build anything, anything built can't make the cities ugly. If you build it in violation of the local authorities, it may be considered stealing. You should not build sukkahs in places where you're not allowed to build, because the city has rules against any building for aesthetic purposes. But he says you might be able to build on rooftops or places she'enon yireh l'rabim. So it's not necessarily the best example, because the reason why you're not building is because the building code doesn't let anything get built because it has to fit in with a certain aesthetic. So if no one sees it, it seems that Rabbi Elyashiv opens up the possibility of still being able to do it, because that's not really the point. All right. Now, the other side of the argument is presented by Rabbi Ephraim Greenblatt. Rabbi Ephraim Greenblatt, for those who aren't familiar, was a rabbi who lived in Memphis for many, many years. where he was not a rabbi of a community or any yeshiva head. He was the balkore at one of the shuls, and he taught Hebrew school, and he taught in the day school, and is a tremendous Talmud Chacham student of Moshe Feinstein, a real righteous individual who I had the pleasure and privilege to know. And he addresses the issue and says, he says that he doesn't see it's the same as stealing. Why? Hare ha fire escape nishar shelo. You own the fire escape. It's part of your property. Rak hamalchus oser lahamid sham shum davar. But they say you're not allowed to put anything there. Rak tzorek laharid. You have to, anything that goes up on the fire escape has to come down. Aval hamakom shelo. It's your property. The building authorities don't have the permission to take your land. They just can control what you do with it. They don't want to take it. If you have a sukkah there, you can fill the mitzvah there. So this is a machlokas about whether you fulfill the mitzvah in a sukkah that you build when you shouldn't have built it, or it was illegal from local ordinances to build it, whether it's aesthetic ordinances or fire ordinances. The Rav Elyashiv approach is to be more forbidding because you went against the rulings or the official ordinances. The Rabbi Greenblatt and others feel no, it's your property, so you don't technically lose. It doesn't lose its status of a sukkah. Now you may have to pay the fines, but it's still technically a sukkah. Now, this dina de malchusa dina issue, it requires a little bit more investigation, because usually we would normally think you got to follow the law of the land. So if the law of the land is you can't build a sukkah there, why are you building a sukkah there? And so Rabbi Usher Weiss dives into this issue, and on some level invokes a little bit of the distinction that we mentioned when we talked about the case originally. Is this something that's aesthetic? Is this something that's safety? And here it talks about the intent of the law or the intent of the ordinance having an influence as to whether violating dina de malchusa dina becomes a problem for the sukkah, or it's maybe a problem in the person who built the sukkah. Right? The sukkah is going to be a sukkah no matter what, even if it goes against dina de malchusa dina. The person who built the sukkah is not acting as properly as they should, but it's still not necessarily sinful. Let's see what he says, and this is quoted. Rabbi Tzvi Reisman is from Los Angeles, and he wrote a whole piece on this discussion. And he quotes a letter from Rabbi Usher Weiss. Rabbi Usher Weiss, a prominent rabbi and legal authority from Jerusalem. So he starts by asking kind of a conceptual question. Dina de malchusa dina, you have to follow the law of the land. But what's the sin for violating dina de malchusa dina? Right, it's illegal, you might go to jail. But religiously speaking, what's the sin? Right, he's not saying you should violate it, but what's the sin if you do violate it? Right? He says certain things, for example, let's say there's certain financial rules. If you violate those financial rules and you keep what you shouldn't keep, for example, you don't pay your taxes, he says you're a thief. We have a category for that. What happens if you can't necessarily attach the law to something specific to an object? Right? What happens in that type of a case? The violation, the Jewish religious violation, when you violated a law, a statute, an ordinance, you sign your name improperly, or you build a sukkah where you shouldn't, is going against the Ratzon HaTorah. You're not doing what Hashem wants from you to do. If you go against a Jewish king or a Jewish government, we have a mitzvah. You're violating a mitzvah of having a Jewish government because you rebelled against a Jewish government. There's no religious commandment that's connected to a non-Jewish government. Right? The Torah wants you to follow the government. So that's why we say you should pray for the government. There's an idea that Jews should follow the government. That's what Judaism wants Jews to follow the government, even if it's not Jewish. V'nira legabe shelas kvod Torah. So misha asa sukkah lo rishayon mitzad hashiltonos. Someone who built a sukkah against the ordinances of the local government. Is the sukkah kosher or puzzle? Is it a sukkah that you could use or you can't use? Since the rule was not instituted because of stealing, nothing about financial ownership or obligations. Is it about safety? It's not about financial issues. If it becomes something that's about if you're acting the way a Jew should act. So maybe you acted improperly, but the sukkah is still a sukkah. Now, this is only talking about if there's no safety issue involved. If there's a safety issue involved, we can go back to what we saw previously, whether it be in terms of the fire escape or whether we in terms of following fire regulations and the like. But if it's something that's more aesthetic, or it's something that has can't be linked to safety, then building the sukkah illegally doesn't mean it's no longer a sukkah. Source number 16, he draws another analogy in a different situation, right? There's a fundamental difference between the laws of the Torah and temporal law. The former are absolute with no room for compromises, where the latter are situational. It's presumably not forbidden by the Torah to jaywalk in the middle of the night when it's clear there's no vehicular traffic and not the remotest possibility of danger. Further, it is likely even the legislators did not intend to forbid jaywalking in such circumstances, but law is simply unable to formally take into account such distinctions. Right? Can you drive 56 miles an hour? Can you turn on red when no one is looking? Right? These are things that the Rabbi Asher Weiss makes a distinction between Jewish law and secular law. Obviously, if it involves money or an ownership, then that's something that's absolute. If it involves safety, it's absolute. But if it doesn't, then there are the laws are situational, and violation of them doesn't come with religious consequences. And so we started off by talking about a swimming pool. Swimming pool has safety issues connected to it. And again, even if you disagree with the safety issues, that's still considered something that requires adherence to. But once you move into the realm of aesthetics, and once you move away from safety, if you can do so, then there becomes a certain flexibility, not with regards to the actions of the person who flouts the law, but whether there are religious consequences. I don't think anyone would be able to say this distinction, argue this distinction to avoid paying a ticket for jaywalking if you actually got the jaywalking ticket. But from a religious, spiritual perspective, that person isn't going against the wishes of the Torah in that type of a situation with this analysis of Rabbi Asher Weiss. Questions, comments? I know, certainly in play, anyone who's ever done any construction, certainly in Atlantic Beach knows about building codes and the like. Questions, comments, or reactions on this situation? Okay, so we moved away from the summertime pool into the realm of Dina Malchus Dina, but I think it's an interesting point of starting that leads to a larger issue within this topic. And look, if we don't end up having a class before Sukkot, we now have a Sukkot topic also. The last piece is more conceptual. We'll end on the idea of leisure in general. Right? What kind of space is there for relaxing, vacationing, and the like? So the Shulchan Aruch in Yoredea has Kol She'efshar, source 17, Kol She'efshar L'Lasok B'Torah V'Eino Osek, O Shakar V'Shana, O Pirish L'Havle Ha'olam, V'Niach Talmudo, Uznacho, Ariu B'Chlal, Ki Devar Hashem Biza. Anyone who's able to study Torah but doesn't, or is able to read and to study and the like, but instead separates himself into the trivialities or folly of this world, is considered as if he has insulted God. And there's also, you're not even allowed to have a regular conversation. Right? There seems to be an idea that our lives should be consumed with religious pursuits. Torah, Torah, Torah. And if you leave that, then then you have insulted God. However, the average person can't do that all the time. So where does the room for leisure come in? So I think that in general it's very much intuitive, and you don't have very many good sources about balancing this all-consuming obligation for religious and spiritual pursuits with taking time off. But the Rambam, the famous physician scholar, wrote a work introducing the introduction to Pirkei Avot called Shmona Prakim. And there he makes the following comment, source 18. The spirit will grow weary and thought will be disturbed through constant analysis of difficult matters. Just like the body is wearied by its involvement in exhausting labors until it rests and is at peace, and then it returns to equilibrium. Similarly, the spirit needs to rest and engage in the respite of the senses, like looking at beautiful pictures and things until the fatigue leaves it. All right, so the Rambam, and we know that I'm sure people are familiar with other statements of the Rambam, that exercise is important and everything in moderation is important, but you don't really find many sources dealing with it, that it's very much intuitive. And here the Rambam is explicit in setting down that there's room for this type of disengagement from holy pursuits, right? WHOLLY, holy pursuits, and to engage in something more removed from that. Doesn't become secular, because ultimately it allows for a return or reinvigoration to continue in the spiritual pursuits. There, for anyone who's interested, Rabbi J.J. Schachter has a piece on this in the Torah to Go from Shavuos 2019. You can look it up online. He has some other anecdotes, but for the most part, the engagement with the realm of leisure or relaxation is anecdotal. It's not going to be found in chapter, verse, or in a description of a code of Jewish law like the Shulchan Aruch. Another way of looking at this, and someone who embraced this from a more holistic perspective, the Rambam did it from a more rational, behavioral perspective. Rav Kook addressed it from a spiritual perspective, and it had to do with ha'hitamlut, right? The exercise, the physical endeavor activities. Shetzirei Yisrael oskim ba be'eretz Yisrael lechazek et gufam, yishvil liot banim amitze koach le'umah, that they're strengthening their bodies to be stronger citizens of the nation. He misachleles es hakoach haruchani shel hatzadikim ha'elyonim. It complements the spiritual activities of the righteous. Oskim yifludim shel shemas hakdoshim, that are involved in unifying these holy names of God, laharbot havlata ta'or eloki ba'olam, to spread to increase the light of God in the world. Ve'en giloi or echad omed below chaveiro klal. You can't have one without the other. So this is, Rav Kook, who in general tried to find a more unifying ethos to the behavior of Jews, regardless if they were doing more things more spiritual or physical, and said, no, they're both important. The exercise of those who want to be able to work in the fields complements the spiritual pursuits of the tzaddikim, and he says that there are. You need both of these aspects, and hopefully the two sides will elevate the whole, and we'll get to a place where everything is more spiritual. So I think, by the way, we used this source, I think, last time when dealing with the Olympics, which we have again this summer, in terms of the role of sport in Jewish tradition and thought. So similar to the Rambam, he's positive towards outside activities, but for the Rav Kook, in his classic style, takes it in a more spiritual direction, and that it's necessary for the overall spiritual operation of the world to have this type of activity and behavior. So whether it's in our playing hard, or whether it's in our cooling off, or whether it's in all of our recreational activities this summer, should hopefully be leading us in a direction of more connection, as well as adherence to the letter and spirit of the law, both in terms of behavior and in terms of the spiritual realms in which we live. And hopefully everyone has a refreshing and invigorating summer.